In my previous videos, I showed how you could use tools like the Group Gen tool and the Group Paint tool to author polygroups on triangulated meshes, and then use those polygroups to do sort of poly modeling like editing on those raw triangle meshes. So that works really well on sort of structured shapes with things like sharp edges that our heuristics can use to find creases, and that helps us find the sort of underlying semantic faces. But on a model like this bunny, there's no real sharp creases for that tool to pick up on, and so the Group Gen tool tends to make just kind of random patches. So we can't really rely on Group Gen in this case, and we're going to have to rely on Group Paint. So the Group Paint tool has all sorts of features to help you paint groups on a model like this, and I'm going to walk you through a bunch of those features in this video. So one thing you can do is just brush, so you can just paint groups using brush sort of style interface. And if I wanted now, I could jump into polyed and select that face and extrude it. So this lets you do some kinds of sort of edits on even these kind of amorphous triangle meshes. But what I'm actually going to do today is use Group Paint to split up this model into regions that we're going to use to do UVs. So basically, UVing a model like this can be quite difficult, and the Group Paint tool is going to let us do it because we're going to paint groups and then we're going to unwrap based on those groups. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is make a few quick groups, and I'm going to, instead of painting with the brush, I'm going to switch to a poly lasso mode of this tool. So this lets you do a couple things. One is you can do kind of clicking, right, to make a poly, and when I close it, it's going to assign a new group to all the faces in there. Remember, there's some hotkeys here. Shift Q will allocate a new group, and Shift G I can use to pick up a group. So I've made a group there. I think I'm just going to jump back to the brush and maybe go in, and you can hold Shift to erase to clean up the borders of this a little bit. Make that brush a bit smaller. If I was doing this really carefully, I would go in, and maybe paint more carefully. But I'm actually just going to be a bit rough because the UVs are going to sort of sort out a lot of that stuff. Okay, I'm going to jump back to polylasso. So in addition to that clicking, you can also just draw a path like this, a smooth path. And you notice you don't even really have to close the smooth path. So actually I just have to draw a line like this, and it will sort of assign the group to all the pieces on that side. Oh, I didn't allocate a new group there, so I need to Shift Q, and then I can just jump to group fill, and now that region has a new group. Gonna allocate a new one. So another thing that I might want to do here now is I want to just draw a line, but if I do that, it's going to modify these existing groups, right? If I just do something like this. So what I can do is only set ungrouped, check that, and now only the areas that don't have a group are going to get assigned a new one when I draw that line. Okay, and then I could switch here to group fill, Shift Q, one more new group, and paint this other side. The colors here, unfortunately, if we switch to unlit, actually, they get a bit more distinct. They're kind of faint. It's because they're blending with the underlying white. Okay, so now we've split this model up into pieces, and if we look, we've actually covered the whole thing with groups. So we can hit accept. We'll just stay on unlit here. I think it'll be okay. So I'm going to jump to the Unwrap tool. I'm going to switch the option here to by polygroups, and you see now we're getting UVs on the whole model, and I can turn on the preview, and we can even see what it looks like over there. I'll turn the wireframe on. So you can see it's actually unfolding these patches, but there's very high distortion. So if I turn this checkerboard up 100, you see even on the ears here it's pretty bad. So we need to go back and do some more group painting. So one thing, I'm going to turn off the floor because it's in the way, is this bottom piece here does actually have a nice crisp edge. So I can switch to the brush tool, or I could also use the fill for this. I'm going to open the filters here, and I can set an angle threshold. So I'm going to set that pretty low, make the brush a bit bigger, make a new group. Oh, I need to uncheck. So I need to uncheck this only set in group now because I want to be able to paint these areas that are already allocated, right? And so now this will not paint over that sort of crease along the bottom. So that can be really useful for picking out areas that do have a nice border. Okay, now we split the bottom into its own patch, so that's going to unwrap better. Now the other place where there were some problems was here in the ears. So what I'm going to do is switch back to poly lasso. Angle threshold turns off. Allocate a new group, and I'm just going to, whoops, do this for one, and then another new group for the other side. Okay, so now let's try this again, accept, and jump back into unwrap. And you see things are getting better. The distortion is kind of lower across the whole thing. But we have a few weird things now. We have this head patch, and it has some holes in it, which is usually not ideal for UVs. And we still have these ears being really distorted because their whole surface is getting kind of shrunk into the border of the outside. So we're going to go back to group paint here now. Okay, so now I want to work on just this one ear. I'm going to kind of split it in two. And so I'm going to do that with painting, but I don't want to modify anything else here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another function, which is freeze. So I can hover over a region and hit Shift F, and it'll freeze that group. So now I can't paint in any of those other areas, right? So if I paint, it's only going to paint on this face. I'm going to reset this angle threshold. Okay, and the other thing I want to do is I just want to use the camera to basically say only paint on what I can see, right? So if I put a paint here, it's going to actually wrap around the back. So I can set the visibility filter to front facing or unoccluded. Front facing means it's facing the camera, and unoccluded means that the sort of brush can hit it in the current viewpoint. So front facing will work pretty well here. So basically I'm going to do that, and you see it didn't paint over the back. Maybe go in here. Well, we'll just accept this for now. I could, whoops, I didn't want to accept it. I wanted to keep going. And then we're going to do this other side. So in addition to the freeze, where I could click through and freeze a bunch of them, I can also use Shift G to pick up this group that's under the cursor, and then I can say freeze others, and that'll freeze everything else but this group. So now I'm just going to allocate a new one because I picked up that green one, and do the same thing on this side. Right, so now we've set that so I can unfreeze the rest. So now we split those ears in half. We just have this head part left, which is a little weird because it has this hole in the back. So what I'm going to just do is go in and paint these two ears across a little bit so they fill that gap. Make the brush even smaller. I'm going to pick up this group, paint it across, and then this group, paint it across a little bit. Maybe go like this. So now I've sort of open or close that gap there. So now I could accept this. There's still a hole though, you see. And so what I'm actually going to do is cut that whole head in half. That sounds gruesome, but I'm just going to split it down the middle into two groups. So again, I'm going to pick that group up with Shift G, freeze others, and then I'm going to jump to poly lasso, allocate a new group, and just go like this. Oops. Oh, I need to change this filter. So the filters affect all the different modes, so I don't want that in this case. So I just drew a little bit of a curved line there, and that picked up those two. So now if we accept and go back to unwrap, you see that now we've got basically a nice UV unwrap of the whole shape. And there's a little bit more work I could probably do maybe here on the front feet if I cared about having really regular UVs. But basically we've split up all the mesh here into nice patches. So I'll just jump back to group paint and mention a few other things. There's a few other operations here. So we can do some things in the filtering when you're brushing to do things like filter at UV seams. So there's no UV seams or normal seams in this model, but you can use those when you're painting if they exist. And then there's a few operations here like clear current and grow current. So you can do things like, if I want to just get rid of this green group, I can pick it up and then click clear current, and it'll just erase that group from the model. And I can also, shrink it or grow it. And those are just some of the operations, and those respect the freezing filters and things like that. And so that's a few ways you can do kind of group manipulations in this tool. Okay, so that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching.